"You boys got 30 seconds to move that truck or I'm dragging it into the creek," Grandpa said, lighting a cigarette like it was just another Tuesday. The man in aviators blinked, glanced at his clipboard, then laughed, right until Grandpa walked off and started up the tow truck. It all began on a quiet morning when the only thing louder than the cicadas was Grandpa's rusted radio blaring Merle Haggard out the barn window. I was helping patch some fencing near the south pasture when we both noticed a dust trail kicking up along the ridge road. Not the kind made by one of our trucks. This one was too clean, too polished, and too out of place to be anyone local. It wasn't a delivery, and it definitely wasn't a neighbor. We both stopped working and watched that truck roll right past our private property sign, down the slope, and straight onto the edge of our barn lot like it owned the place. The truck was white, gleaming like it had just rolled off a dealership lot, but it had stenciled letters on the side, HOA Patrol. Not an official seal, not a badge, just blocky letters and a cheap magnetic decal slapped on the door. Two men stepped out. One looked like he'd just graduated from folding sweaters at a department store. The other wore knockoff aviators and carried a clipboard like it gave him authority. They didn't even glance at the signs or the chained cattle gate they nudged open. Instead, they parked their truck between Grandpa's hay trailer and our old feeding troughs, right where his dog usually naps in the shade. Grandpa didn't shout. He didn't even curse. He just took a long pull on his cigarette, muttered something like "here we go again," and dusted off his hands on his jeans before walking over. I trailed behind, already guessing this was going to be one of those situations where Grandpa didn't need backup, but I wasn't about to miss it. "Can I help you?" Grandpa asked, calm but with that gravel underboot tone he gets when he knows someone's full of it. The clipboard guy straightened up like he'd just been asked to lead a parade. "We've had multiple reports of zoning violations and unauthorized equipment storage near this property line," the man said, trying to sound official but overplaying every syllable. "We're with the Riverbend HOA Expansion Enforcement Team. Just performing routine compliance checks." Grandpa didn't answer. He turned, took a few steps back toward his barn, then stopped and pointed a thumb at the tow rig parked beside the fence. "You've got 30 seconds, he said flatly, as he pulled his cigarette from his mouth and tapped the ash into the dirt. "That truck's still here after that, it's taking a swim." The man looked confused. The younger guy, probably an intern or a neighbor's cousin roped into this nonsense, gave a nervous laugh. Clipboard guy didn't move. He adjusted his sunglasses like that'd help him see the problem clearer and said something about cooperation under regional ordinances. Grandpa wasn't listening. He had already climbed into his beat-up Chevy tow truck and cranked it over. That thing hadn't started that fast in years. Even the diesel engine sounded like it knew something special was about to happen. I'll be honest, I thought he was bluffing. We'd seen plenty of HOA types try to throw weight around before, but they usually showed up at the fence and never crossed it. This was different. These clowns were parked smack in the middle of our working land, mouthing off about regulations we didn't fall under. There wasn't an HOA within 5 miles of our ranch, and even if there was, nobody had jurisdiction out here except maybe the sheriff, and I knew for a fact Grandpa taught half that department how to shoot. Grandpa reversed the tow truck, then yanked a chain off the rack and started hooking it to the HOA truck's rear axle like he was hauling firewood. The clipboard guy finally snapped out of it and started waving his arms, shouting about lawsuits and impound violations. Grandpa didn't blink. The chain clicked into place, he tapped the gas, and the fake patrol truck lurched backward like it had just realized it made a very bad decision. The younger guy shouted and ran after it. The clipboard guy stumbled as he tried to grab the driver's door handle, but Grandpa already had momentum. With tires spinning and grass tearing up, he hauled that sparkling white truck out of the barn lot, over the gravel path, past the pasture fence, and down toward the creek. That little slope might not look like much, but after a good spring rain, it turns slick and muddy, perfect for washing away pride and hubris. Grandpa hit the brakes just long enough to time the swing, then released the chain with one loud clunk. The truck, still in neutral and now completely at gravity's mercy, slid down the rest of the slope and landed nose first into the shallow bank. Water splashed, mud flew, and the HOA paint peeled like it was ashamed to be seen. Clipboard guy just stood there. His sunglasses were gone, his socks were muddy, and his face had turned the same red as the old barn paint. "You tow it out yourself," Grandpa said, stepping out of the truck like a man who'd just delivered a sermon. "But next time, bring a real badge." I couldn't breathe. I was laughing so hard I thought I might pass out. The young guy was trying to fish his phone out to record everything, but Grandpa beat him to it. He took a photo of the truck nose deep in the creek, then calmly called the sheriff. "Got some trespassers out here claiming to be HOA, he said into the phone. "Wanna come check their paperwork before I toss the clipboard in two?" They didn't even try to leave. The fake patrol truck wasn't going anywhere soon, and neither was Grandpa. He stood at the top of the hill with his arms crossed like he'd just defended the Alamo. 15 minutes later, a deputy cruiser rolled in, lights off but window down. When the deputy stepped out and saw Grandpa, he just sighed and smirked. "Let me guess," the deputy said, eyeing the soggy truck. "Didn't read the sign." "Didn't read much of anything," Grandpa said, offering the deputy a towel from the horse trough. The deputy laughed, walked over to the soaked clipboard guy, and asked for ID. It was about to be a long day, for them. The truck was still half submerged when the deputy started his questions. Clipboard guy looked like a cat pulled from a bathtub, soggy, sputtering, and a whole lot less confident than when he strutted onto our land claiming to represent the HOA. The younger guy was pacing near the fence, talking fast on his phone and throwing anxious glances at the truck like he thought it might just float away if he wished hard enough. Grandpa leaned against the post at the edge of the pasture, arms folded, cigarette smoldering between his fingers. The deputy took his sweet time inspecting the truck's decal, noting its generic look, then crouched to check the non-existent plates. He gave a low whistle, shook his head, and looked up at Grandpa. "You say they didn't have any paperwork?" the deputy asked. "Nope," Grandpa replied, dragging the word out like gravel. "Just started talking about ordinances and zoning laws like they owned the whole valley." The deputy stood and turned to the soggy man, whose shirt was now sticking to his chest and whose once perfect hair had become a swampy helmet of sweat and creek water. "Sir, do you have any identification? Something that shows you're with an official enforcement agency?" Clipboard guy fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a bent laminated card that looked like it had been printed at home and run through a laminator on its last legs. The deputy didn't even take it. He just looked at the card, then looked at the man's face like he was giving him a chance to take the lie back. When the man held firm, the deputy sighed and finally took it, glancing at it like it had just insulted him. "This says you're a compliance observer for an HOA subcommittee," he read out loud. "This HOA have a name." "Riverbend Expansion Division," the man mumbled. "That's funny," the deputy replied, slipping the card into his notepad. "Because there ain't no such registered HOA in this county. And even if there were, it wouldn't give you the right to enter private land, much less park a vehicle without permission." The fake officer tried to stammer something about a new jurisdiction being proposed through county ordinances, that they were scouting properties for boundary assessments. It was a storm of meaningless buzzwords that fell flat in the open pasture. Grandpa didn't say anything. He just turned, walked over to the truck, and popped the back open. The clipboard was still inside, along with a couple of paper folders, a walkie-talkie, and what looked like a collection of community notices, printed, not mailed, and all stamped with a logo none of us recognized. The deputy followed him, pulled on gloves, and started flipping through the papers. A couple minutes later, he pulled out a folded map, one that made the whole thing stink worse than the creek water. The map had our ranch marked, circled in red, with handwritten notes in the margins about water access, zoning disputes, and non-compliant acreage. There was even a line drawn directly from our creek to a new development marked in green on the far side of the hill. It didn't look like a compliance document. It looked like a plan. "That looks like a development schematic," the deputy muttered, eyes narrowing. "I figured as much when he parked on my hay," Grandpa said, voice as flat as ever. The deputy radioed in for backup, requested someone from zoning enforcement, and gave the clipboard guy a look that could curdle milk. Then he turned to the younger one who had been quiet the whole time, just nervously watching. "You involved in this?" I just ride along sometimes," the kid stammered. "My uncle said it was just part of the new property group. I didn't know it was illegal." "Who's your uncle?" the deputy asked, stepping forward. "Frank Davidson," the kid blurted. That name rang bells. Grandpa's eyebrow twitched and I remembered exactly who that was. Frank Davidson was the smug guy with the glass house near the lake who always talked about streamlining land usage at local meetings. He'd been lobbying to bring more subdivisions out our way and had gotten into a shouting match with Grandpa 2 years ago when he suggested ranchers were inefficient landholders. Seeing his nephew here made the whole picture clearer. The deputy nodded slowly and said he'd be making a call to Mr. Davidson next. Then he turned back toward the truck and called in a tow crew. The clipboard guy tried one last time to argue, claiming he was just a liaison and that it was all a misunderstanding. That's when Grandpa decided he was done listening. "You ever think about how lucky you are that I didn't have the backhoe hooked up today?" he asked, tossing the man's now empty clipboard into the grass. The man didn't respond. He just glared at the truck as if the vehicle itself had betrayed him. The deputy smirked and motioned for them to sit by the fence while things got sorted. By now, a small crowd of our animals had gathered by the gate, curious about all the activity. One of the cows gave a loud, unimpressed snort that made Grandpa chuckle. The tow truck came half an hour later, and by then the deputy had finished explaining the situation to dispatch. It wasn't just a trespassing issue anymore. They were opening a case for fraudulent impersonation of authority and illegal surveying. Apparently, a few similar incidents had popped up in other parts of the county recently, people flashing fake credentials to pressure landowners into signing access agreements they didn't legally have to honor. We hadn't just caught a trespasser. We'd caught the lead rat in a scam operation. The fake officer was taken away without cuffs but with his head down. The younger guy was left behind to wait for a ride home, but he didn't speak much after that. He just sat in the grass, head in hands, muttering that he thought it was just a summer job. Grandpa didn't say anything to him, but I saw him place a cold soda on the fence post near the kid's elbow before walking away. When things finally quieted down and the sun started dipping behind the hill, I sat next to Grandpa on the porch, the wood creaking under our boots. He didn't say much, just stared out toward the slope where the truck had skidded down into the creek, now empty and drying in the evening breeze. "Think we've seen the last of them?" I asked. "Not a chance," Grandpa said. "But next time they're bringing shovels, not clipboards. And I'll be ready." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. Grandpa already had a plan, and when Grandpa plans something, it usually ends with a very loud, very public reminder not to mess with a man who's seen more dirt than city halls ever paved. The following morning, Grandpa was already out by the creek with a cup of black coffee and a shovel in hand. He wasn't digging for anything specific, not yet, but it was clear from the way he scanned the dirt that something about the situation had sunk deep into his gut. When Grandpa gets quiet, it usually means his gears are turning, and when his gears turn, someone else is about to have a very bad day. I joined him in the pasture, boots still damp from morning dew, and followed his gaze to a line of painted wooden stakes I hadn't noticed before. They were planted just along the tree line, spaced too evenly to be natural, and marked with orange survey tape fluttering in the breeze. Grandpa walked over to one, crouched, and tugged it free from the soil. A white sticker near the top had a company logo and a barcode. He turned it over in his hand, narrowed his eyes, and gave a low grunt. It didn't take much to put the pieces together. Whoever those fake HOA men were working for, they'd already done some planning. These weren't just markers from a scout, these were development stakes. Lines to a project. Lines through our land. Grandpa and I followed the path of the stakes down toward the bend of the creek, where the water narrowed and curved around a soft patch of mud. It was a prime spot, quiet, shaded, and with a natural slope that would make it easy to dig through. Too easy. Grandpa stood there a moment, then kicked the toe of his boot into the soft earth and muttered something about rats burrowing where they didn't belong. We didn't wait around. Back at the house, Grandpa pulled out a dusty box from the closet, one I hadn't seen in years. Inside were stacks of papers, maps, old deeds, and one very large file with the original water rights to the ranch. He spread it across the dining room table, nodding slowly as his eyes scanned every old stamp and handwritten note. Our land wasn't just private property. It came with creek access and protected flow rights grandfathered in before the county ever established water permits. That meant whoever tried to run a pipeline through that bend wasn't just trespassing. They were violating federal law. Later that afternoon, we drove into town and stopped by the zoning office. It was a tan building with air conditioning that smelled like melted plastic and coffee. We didn't say a word to the receptionist, just walked straight back to the planning department where Grandpa slammed the development stake down on the counter in front of a tired-looking clerk. She jumped slightly, then adjusted her glasses and picked it up. Grandpa said evenly, "Why is a land development company placing unauthorized markers across my creek?" She blinked and said she had no idea what he was talking about. That's when he pulled the folded map from his jacket. It was the same one from the clipboard the fake HOA man had left behind. Grandpa unfolded it, pointed at the green-shaded zone marked Future Development, Phase 1, and then jabbed his finger directly on the line that ran through our property. "I want to know who filed this, when they filed it, and why they think they can run a water line through a ranch that's been in my family since before half this county had indoor plumbing." The clerk opened her computer and typed for a minute, then paused. "This wasn't filed through our office," she said carefully. "This is a third-party contractor submission, one that hasn't been approved. The name listed is a subsidiary under Davidson Land and Water Solutions." Grandpa looked at me. I didn't even need to say it. Frank Davidson. Same last name as the nervous kid from the creek. Same guy who'd been harassing landowners about streamlined zoning for years. He wasn't just interested in housing, he wanted the water too. Outside, the sun had turned sharp and hot, baking the asphalt as we crossed the parking lot. Grandpa stopped beside the truck, took out his phone, and dialed a number I didn't recognize. When the call connected, his voice dropped low. "Sheriff," he said, "we found survey stakes along the creek, developer tags. It's Davidson. Again. You still got that contact with the state water board?" The sheriff must have said yes, because Grandpa nodded once, then ended the call without another word. He didn't get mad often, but when he did, it was the slow, simmering kind. The kind that burned long and ended big. That night, we decided to see what else we could dig up. Figuratively and literally. I brought out the trail camera we usually used for watching coyotes near the coop and set it up facing the bend in the creek. Grandpa said he'd seen fresh tire marks near one of the stakes, and if anyone came back, we'd have footage to prove it. Just before dawn, the motion sensor triggered. We didn't hear it at first, but the next morning when Grandpa checked the SD card, we saw everything. 2 men in plain clothes, one carrying a measuring wheel, the other with a GPS pole, walking the stake line in near silence. They were clearly professionals, not survey hobbyists, and one of them wore a company vest with a barely visible logo that matched the one from the stake sticker. They mapped, measured, and left. We had timestamps, faces, gear, the works. We took the footage to the sheriff's office. This time, he didn't just smirk. He printed the images out, made a few phone calls, and asked us to wait. An hour later, a man in a gray suit arrived. He introduced himself as an investigator with the state's Environmental Division. He asked for every detail, what we found, what we saw, what they said. Grandpa laid it all out. From the fake HOA truck to the creekside markers to the footage from the trail cam. The investigator listened quietly, then pulled a thin folder from his bag. Inside were photographs from other properties, ones that had also found stakes, similar decals, and mysterious survey teams. One photo showed a bulldozer digging close to a creek almost identical to ours. Another showed the same Davidson Company logo printed on a black pipeline coil. "These guys are testing boundaries," he said finally. Pushing where they think no one's watching. Grandpa didn't hesitate. Well, they picked the wrong ranch. As we drove home, I could tell Grandpa's silence had shifted. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was calculating. The survey stakes weren't just a threat, they were an invitation. Davidson had made this personal, and Grandpa had no intention of letting it go. By the time we got back, the sun was setting over the hills and Grandpa was already pulling out a notepad, sketching something. I leaned over and saw what looked like a new fence line, but with wires, solar panels, and what suspiciously looked like a set of cameras. He didn't say a word. He just handed me the other notepad and said, "Start measuring. I'm building a line they won't forget." The next morning, before the rooster had even cleared its throat, Grandpa was already halfway down the slope with a sledgehammer in one hand and a post driver in the other. His boots crushed the tall grass like it had personally offended him, and the back of the truck rattled with metal stakes and spools of high-tensile wire. He wasn't just reinforcing the fence. He was building a statement. I followed with the tools, trying to match his pace, but even in his 60s, Grandpa could move like a man on a mission. The plan was simple. The stakes Davidson had planted were going to be outnumbered, outshined, and overridden by a new line of fencing that followed the old property boundaries exactly, but now with motion sensors, cameras, and a healthy dose of barbed humor in the form of posted signs that read things like "Trespassers will be photographed, shamed, and then escorted by Bull." As the first post hit the ground, we heard the rumble of tires on gravel. Not from the road this time, but from the other side of the pasture, just behind the low tree line. Grandpa motioned for me to stay down, and we ducked behind the hay trailer. Through the branches, we spotted a black SUV with tinted windows and a magnetic decal on the door that read Davidson Water Solutions. Out stepped Frank Davidson himself, silver-haired and smug as ever, wearing a vest like he thought he was the mayor of Progress. He was followed by two men in matching vests, both carrying tablets and clipboards. They didn't see us at first. They walked the line of stakes slowly, pointing at things and making notes. Then Frank pulled a folded sheet from his pocket and laid it across the hood of the SUV. He began gesturing like he was orchestrating a symphony, clearly explaining a route, likely the illegal one, through our creek bend. That's when Grandpa stood up, dusted off his pants, and walked straight toward them with the kind of calm that only comes from someone who already knows how the day's going to end. Frank turned, spotted him, and offered a grin like this was just a friendly visit between neighbors. "Morning, Sam," he called out. "Didn't expect to see you up so early." "Didn't expect to see your boots on my creek bank," Grandpa replied, voice level but cutting. "Last I checked, that water's mine. And this land? Still private." Frank raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just doing a little field recon. No harm in checking access, right? I've got a proposal going to the board next month. Thought I'd get a head start." "Funny thing about starting early," Grandpa said, walking up to him, "is sometimes you run right into a wall you didn't expect." Frank gave a forced chuckle. "Come on, Sam. You and I both know this town's changing. These ranches? They are not forever. What I'm offering is a chance to get ahead of it. We're not trying to take anything from you. We're trying to bring value." "You're trying to bring pipes through a creek that don't belong to you," Grandpa replied, taking a slow step closer. "You sent boys pretending to be HOA cops, laid stakes without permits, and now you think a smile makes it okay." Frank's jaw twitched for a moment before he recovered. "Sam, you're overreacting. That HOA business wasn't my doing. Must have been a subcontractor misunderstanding." "That misunderstanding almost got winched into the river," Grandpa said. "And now you're standing on the same patch of mud thinking I won't call the sheriff again." Frank waved at the two men to hang back, then leaned in slightly. "Sam, let me level with you. There's money in this, real money. You give us a 20-foot easement through the creek bend, and we'll pay top dollar. You wouldn't even notice it's there." "I'd notice," Grandpa said. "Every time I saw one of your trucks parked where my grandkids fish. Every time your project floods this field because you didn't ask where the runoff goes. And every time I think about the fact that you didn't even bother knocking before you started carving up my land." Frank frowned, his tone shifting. "Be reasonable. You came here without a permit. You sent fake agents to threaten people. You planted survey stakes on land that isn't yours. And now you're asking me to be reasonable." For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Grandpa looked at me, still crouched by the trailer, and nodded. I stood and began filming. Frank saw the phone, eyes narrowing, then quickly turned away. "You're going to regret this, Sam," he muttered. "There's momentum here. You can't hold it back forever." "I don't have to," Grandpa replied. "I just have to make sure you trip on your own boots before you get too far." Frank and his team left not long after, leaving behind tire ruts and one very annoyed pair of hawks circling overhead. We finished the new fence by sundown, 3 layers of barbed wire, solar-powered lights, and trail cams hidden in the brush. Grandpa even installed a remote gate lock, just for good measure. The next morning, a marked county vehicle rolled up our drive. A tall man in a tie stepped out, briefcase in hand, and introduced himself as a representative from the County Land Records Division. He had a copy of a complaint submitted by Davidson claiming our new fence encroached on a public utility corridor. Grandpa led him straight to the creek, showed him the original deed and water rights, then handed him a copy of the motion sensor footage of the nighttime survey team. The man reviewed everything quietly, then pulled out his own maps. A moment later, he looked up and confirmed that not only had Davidson's claim been premature, it had no legal standing. They didn't even file for a proper inspection, he said. No registered utility easement, no notice to property owners, no environmental survey. Looks like they were hoping you'd just sign and save them the trouble. Grandpa's only reply was a grunt and a nod toward the trail cam. That evening, just as the sky turned orange, a sheriff's deputy and 2 county officials visited Davidson's main field office outside town. What they found was a trailer full of forged permit documents, maps showing unauthorized expansions across multiple properties, and a half-dozen access agreements signed under false pretenses. Frank Davidson wasn't arrested on the spot, but he was served. And his smug grin finally cracked. Back on the ranch, Grandpa pulled a folding chair out to the creek bank, sat down with a mason jar of sweet tea, and watched the birds settle in. He didn't say much, but I could tell something had shifted. This wasn't just a defense of our land anymore. This was a message. One that echoed louder than any clipboard, any forged map, or any empty promise of value. They came for the water. They walked over the line. And Grandpa made sure they didn't leave clean. 3 days after the confrontation by the creek, the dust hadn't even settled when a state vehicle pulled up our drive. The car was unmarked but had the unmistakable shape and paint job of a government-issued ride. Grandpa was already on the porch, sipping from the same mason jar of tea, and he didn't move a muscle as the man stepped out. The visitor was tall, thin, wearing tan slacks and a pressed shirt, holding a leather folder that looked older than the truck parked beside him. He introduced himself as an inspector from the State Environmental Commission, dispatched after a formal complaint was logged regarding illegal land alteration and unauthorized survey activities, by us. Grandpa raised an eyebrow, stood up slowly, and walked down the steps with the kind of smile that usually meant trouble for someone else. The man opened his folder and began reading from a form that claimed Davidson Water Solutions had filed an emergency environmental impact grievance. According to them, our newly installed fence posed a barrier to future public utility access and potentially disrupted the natural water flow of the creek. Grandpa chuckled so softly I almost missed it. Then he motioned for the man to follow him to the barn, where he kept the full archive of documents our family had collected since before I was born. Inside, beneath a stack of dusty veterinary manuals and a tin of old coins, Grandpa pulled out 2 sealed folders and handed them over. "These here," he said, "are the original records of our water rights from 1962. That one there is a certified topographical map from '85, showing this creek and its protected designation. That third one is the updated boundary survey we paid for just last year, filed legally and confirmed by your own office. So unless your complaint is based on invisible water spirits or imaginary utility lines, I'd say Davidson's barking up a dead tree. The inspector flipped through the documents slowly, one by one, occasionally nodding or squinting. He asked a few sharp questions, but Grandpa answered each without blinking, quoting dates and filing numbers from memory. Eventually, the inspector closed the folder and sighed. He admitted, not with pride, that the complaint was paper-thin and likely an attempt to delay or discredit us. He promised to report the abuse of the complaint system and said an official letter would arrive in a few days clearing our name of all accusations. Grandpa didn't say thank you. He just tipped his hat and saw the man out like he'd never been worried in the first place. Later that evening, Grandpa sat back down at the dining room table with a fresh cup of coffee and started writing a letter. Not an email. A real letter, hand-signed in blue ink, addressed to the State Land Board. I watched him draft it line by line, an official request to investigate the recent pattern of survey stake placements across neighboring properties, citing harassment, misrepresentation, and violations of environmental regulations. He included photos, timestamps, and a hand-drawn map showing every illegal stake location we had found on our ranch. He added witness names and the contact information for the deputy who'd handled the original trespassing call. When he was done, he handed it to me and asked for one more thing. "Run it by the post office in town tomorrow," he said. "And stop by the feed store. I'm gonna need more fence wire." The next morning, just as I was backing out of the driveway with the letter and the list in hand, a black truck pulled up fast, skidding slightly in the gravel. I slammed the brakes, thinking it might be Davidson again, but instead a familiar face stepped out, Deputy Keller, the same one who had laughed at the fake HOA badge. He looked less amused today. He waved me down and asked if Grandpa was home. I pointed to the porch, and the deputy walked over quickly, his radio crackling as he approached. "I thought you'd want to hear this in person," Keller said, lowering his voice. "Last night we got a call from a ranch 5 miles east of here, same deal. Survey stakes, trespassers, no IDs, no permits. Only this time they got caught digging." Grandpa didn't react at first, just set down his cup and asked what they were digging. "Trench. Narrow, maybe 2 feet wide. Looked like a prep line for pipeline housing. We found fresh PVC and some of those same phony HOA warning signs near the site." Grandpa let out a slow breath, the kind that came before a long pause or a long story, depending on his mood. But this time, there was neither. He simply turned, walked back into the house, and came out with a manila envelope. He handed it to the deputy. "This here's everything I've logged: maps, photos, license plates, and a record of each stake we pulled out of our land. Add it to your report. And tell whoever's still letting Davidson play developer cowboy that next time he crosses my fence line, I'll be filing charges for racketeering." Keller looked surprised, but he nodded. He said the sheriff's office was now working with the county prosecutor and the state attorney general to explore charges, especially after the forged documents were discovered at Davidson's site. He said things were moving quickly now, faster than anyone expected. That afternoon, we were visited by a reporter from a small regional paper. Word had gotten out about the survey scam, and someone had tipped them off about what happened to the HOA truck in our creek. Grandpa didn't want to talk at first, but eventually, he sat down with her at the fence line and explained everything, calm, measured, no exaggeration. He told her the truth, that all it takes for these companies to steal your land is a few fake forms, a magnetic decal, and the hope that you're too tired to fight. He said this time, they messed with the wrong pasture. The story ran in the Sunday paper under the headline, "Local Rancher Tows Fake HOA into Creek, Uncovers Developer Land Scam." The photo was perfect, Grandpa standing at the edge of the water, arms crossed, the white truck's nose still visible in the background. It went viral faster than any of us could have imagined. Calls came in from neighboring counties. Emails flooded the sheriff's office. Other ranchers started digging up their own fields and pulling out stakes they hadn't thought twice about until now. Davidson's quiet expansion project had just been dragged into the daylight and into the headlines. By the end of the week, the state had frozen all permits associated with Davidson's company. His office trailer was raided again, this time by state agents with clipboards and cameras. Files were seized, equipment tagged, and workers questioned. Grandpa watched it all unfold with the patience of someone who knew the truth would eventually catch up, even if it had to ride a slow horse. The final letter arrived 2 days later. It was from the county land registry. Due to improper documentation and failure to notify affected property owners, the corridor Davidson had tried to claim through our creek had been permanently revoked. Not only that, but the legal boundary lines were being updated to reflect historical usage, and a previously contested patch of land near the southern fence was now officially registered under our name. Grandpa didn't celebrate. He just nodded once and said, "I figured they'd owe us something by the end of this." Then he folded the letter and added it to the file cabinet under a tab labeled Victory. The mornings on the ranch felt different after all that. The air had the same crisp bite, the same hum of cicadas, and the same smell of damp soil mixed with hay, but there was a quiet pride running underneath it now. Grandpa's routine hadn't changed a bit. He still got up before the sun, still fed the animals with the same gruff affection, and still hollered at the barn cat when it knocked over the feed bucket. But every time he walked past the new fence line, I noticed the way his eyes lingered on the posts a little longer. He didn't smile. Grandpa wasn't the smiling type. But the corners of his mouth would twitch just enough to show he was satisfied in his own way. We'd made that fence stronger than necessary, not because we had to but because it sent a message. The solar sensors blinked in the dark, the cameras clicked when triggered, and the motion lights were so bright they once scared off a whole herd of deer. Grandpa pretended to be annoyed about it, but I caught him rewinding the footage the next morning with a mug of coffee like he was watching a nature documentary. One afternoon, while we were mending some wiring near the back end of the pasture, the trail camera pinged. It sent a live feed to Grandpa's phone, a new feature I'd installed for him, though he'd insisted at first he didn't need any of that tetchy nonsense. But he'd taken to it fast. He tapped the screen and held it up. On the live feed, 2 unfamiliar men in button-up shirts and dusty jeans stood at the edge of the creek, looking over the water like they were sizing it up again. No clipboards this time. No trucks. Just the same suspicious posture we'd come to recognize. Grandpa didn't speak. He just walked to the barn, pulled on his heavier boots, and grabbed the old tow hook. We didn't confront them right away. We watched from the top of the slope. The 2 men stood there for a few more minutes, then started walking back the way they came. One of them turned briefly and took a photo. That was enough for Grandpa. He whistled low, not at me, but at the dogs. Within seconds, Scout and Dusty were bounding across the field, barking with that deep-chested thunder that made strangers second-guess every decision they'd made in the last hour. The men panicked and bolted, slipping once on the muddy slope before scrambling into the brush. The dogs didn't chase them far, just enough to make their point. Grandpa gave a short nod of approval, then looked at me and said, "Might be time to post another warning sign." We'd barely sat down for lunch when another call came in, this time from the sheriff himself. Davidson had officially declared bankruptcy. The state had frozen his accounts, seized his equipment, and opened a formal investigation into environmental fraud and land misrepresentation. Multiple landowners were pressing charges, and the county had already drafted a cease-and-desist order on anything tied to Davidson Water Solutions. According to the sheriff, Frank had packed up his personal belongings from the trailer office and left town under the radar. Some said he moved west. Others said he left the country. Grandpa didn't care. He just listened in silence, then thanked the sheriff and hung up. But the real moment of closure came a week later, when a package arrived in the mail. No return address. Just our family name scribbled across the front in bold ink. Inside was a framed photograph. A drone shot, actually, taken from above the creek bend. It showed the fence, the slope, the tree line, and a perfect view of the rusted-out white truck still half-submerged at the edge of the water. Someone had written a single sentence across the bottom of the photo in red marker, "We got the message." Grandpa didn't frame it. He didn't hang it anywhere. He just leaned it against the wall in the barn next to the tool chest and left it there like some strange war trophy. I asked him once if he thought it was a threat or a surrender. Could be either, he said. Doesn't matter which. They won't be back. In the months that followed, things went back to normal, or at least a new kind of normal. The fence became part of the landscape. The creek ran clear and quiet again. A few neighbors came by, asked questions, and eventually started building out their own reinforcements. Word had spread far beyond our valley. Some folks even started calling Grandpa the sheriff without a badge. He hated the nickname, claimed it was nonsense. But I noticed he started wearing his old leather belt again, the one with the silver buckle from his rodeo days. One evening, long after the sun had dipped below the ridge and the frogs had taken over the night with their croaking songs, Grandpa pulled out 2 lawn chairs and set them up by the water. He handed me a cold bottle of root beer, the kind he knew I liked but pretended not to remember buying. We sat there for a while without speaking, just listening to the wind rustling through the cottonwoods and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. You know, he said eventually, I don't build fences to keep people out. I build them to show where respect begins. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He leaned back, eyes scanning the creek. Problem with folks like Davidson is they think land's just numbers and parcels. But land remembers. It remembers who walks it, who works it, and who tries to steal it. I glanced at the water's edge, where the white truck still sat, its decals faded and its windows fogged from months of weather. We'd left it there on purpose. Not out of laziness. Out of principle. They come again, you gonna tow the next one too? I asked. Grandpa looked over at me, the faintest grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Depends, he said. Might just let the bulls handle it next time. They are better judges of character anyway. We both laughed at that. Real, easy laughter. The kind that only comes after a storm has passed and the skies are clear again. When we finally packed up the chairs and headed back to the house, I turned for one last look at the creek. The moonlight hit the water just right, making it shimmer like silver through the trees. And there, halfway buried in the mud, was a silent reminder to anyone thinking of crossing the line again. Some fences are built with wire. Some with warnings. But the best ones? They are built with memory. And out here, that creek remembers everything.